It's been about 11 years. It was an autumn night, and I decided to take a little walk around our housing estate with my dog, Sunny. Sunny is a big, black Labrador mix. She's a great dog and very cuddly, but for some reason, she hates other female dogs. She also has a strong protective instinct, so she always snarls when she doesn't know or doesn't like someone or something. There were no street lights inside the settlement. The only lighting was provided at the house entrances. There was a small park with playgrounds between the rows of houses, but as already mentioned, everything was in complete darkness. Due to this, Sunny's dark fur blended in with the darkness, only to be heard now and then when she was chasing a rabbit into the bushes. I should also add that she wasn't on a leash. I only ever use her leash if other female dogs are nearby, since she's extremely obedient and always comes when I call her. So, while I strolled comfortably through the dark settlement, Sunny ran happily through the area in the bushes. I always only guessed where she was, because I could not see her, so I could only hear her from time to time. At some point, I noticed a small shadow that was whizzing around me. When I looked more closely, I could see Sunny. She was running in large circles around me, and I initially thought she was chasing something. But the circles she drew grew smaller and smaller. She didn't make any noise, and I went on comfortably, because I thought she was having her so-called 5 minutes, where she tends to act crazy. At some point, I didn't see her anymore, but I went on knowing she would follow. Then, I heard a sound. Footsteps, but they weren't my own. I was startled because they were so close behind me so suddenly. I turned around but couldn't see anything thanks to the darkness. I got nervous and called for Sunny, because it could have been someone with a dog. Sunny didn't come, and I easily panicked. She suddenly appeared in front of me out of nowhere and began to growl as violently as she ever has before. My blood froze because it couldn't be a good thing. Then she started growling and walking straight ahead for about 2 or 3 meters. Then she stopped. At that moment, I recognized a figure, completely in black. This person was shocked in front of Sunny and didn't move an inch as Sunny started barking like there was no tomorrow. The person slowly walked backwards, towards the lighted house entrances, and then I saw Sunny bare teeth in front of a young man wearing a hooded sweater, who probably started to experience the same fears as I did when I noticed him. Because of how quietly he snuck up on me, he couldn't have had any good in mind. Since it was too dark, however, he could not see Sunny, and she must have surprised him at the right moment. Sunny leaped at the man who let out a terrified scream, and I was able to hear something fall out of his hand onto the ground. He ran, and my dog followed. After I had released myself from my shock stiffness, I called out to Sunny as loud as I could, until after a short time she was standing in front of me again, wagging her tail. I took her on the leash and then went to where the guy had dropped something, and indeed, there was an arm-thick branch on the ground that he certainly didn't have with him to throw sticks. At home, it gradually dawned on me that my Sunny did not have her 5 minutes when she circled me, but she had long since noticed and kept an eye on this piece of crap person to protect me. The whole encounter was definitely creepy, but also a relief. I was, and still am, so grateful for Sunny. This happened in New York City years ago when I was a freshman in college. I was out partying one night with some friends. I wasn't drunk or on any hard drugs, but I definitely wasn't entirely sober. Around 3 a.m., we went our separate ways, and I got off the train and began walking home. I had to take a longer route home that night because some train lines were under maintenance. When I got off the train, I realized I had to walk past the cemetery and started to feel uneasy, but I wasn't afraid for any real reason. It was only about 10 blocks and I'd be home. I always saw trucks lined up on the cemetery blocks, and being it was a desolate area, I assumed truckers would park their trucks by the cemetery to take naps or sleep before continuing their routes. Back then I thought nothing of it. A few minutes after getting off the train, I heard a faint sound of what I guessed was a car or truck door being shut behind me. I turned around and saw nothing. I scanned my surroundings once quickly and didn't see any other person ahead or behind me as far as I could see. I kept walking, this time a bit faster, and about a minute later, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned as quickly as possible, and I saw a man walking fast a few feet behind me. When he saw me turn, he began catcalling me by making kissing noises. I was used to these catcalls, especially living in New York City. By my house, there would be a line of men on the corner every morning, waiting to be picked up for construction work, and every time I passed them to go to the store, I would get catcalled and harassed. So, I ignored him and kept walking, but definitely faster this time. A few seconds later, he was running up to catch up with me, and he was now at my side, speaking to me in Spanish, which I don't speak. He grabbed my arm tightly and began pulling me toward him, so I reacted by screaming and fighting him off. He pushed me up against the cemetery fence, and, in the midst of this, my heart sunk to the floor, as I thought I was about to get raped, or worse. Seconds later, he had me off my feet by both arms, and his face turned white in the moonlight. He had a face of pure horror as he looked past me into the cemetery, fixated on something. He let out a blood-curdling scream and let me go. As I dropped to the ground, he was already across the street and running out of sight. Choking on tears, shaking, beside myself, I picked myself up and ran as fast as I could for the last few blocks to my house. I did not turn to look inside that cemetery once. I did not turn around at all. I did not stop until I was home. I never took that train or walked past that cemetery again, and to be honest, I never told my parents, and only told a handful of friends over the years because till this day, I still don't understand what happened, but something probably saved my life. I'm a short 29-year-old woman, and I work in a pub, so I often get out of work quite late on the weekends and usually head home around 2 a.m. I never wear my headphones when I'm headed home at night, so this particular night was no different than usual. Alarm set, doors locked and checked, said goodbye to my colleague, and then we went our separate ways to get home. I usually cross the grocery store parking lot to get home that is well lit, and that night something struck me as odd. There were a couple of cars parked there, which is normal, but something just felt off. I looked over my shoulder and clocked a guy in a hat walking a distance behind me. This wasn't necessarily weird, but I decided to keep an eye on him nonetheless. I exited the car park to the main road that I lived off of, but still had a good mile or so to go before I reached my flat. I checked over my shoulder again, and sure enough, this guy was walking the same direction as me. The distance between us was starting to close, so I decided to cross the road, which I'd usually do at that point anyways. Looking over my shoulder, I was able to not only look for traffic coming, but I was also able to keep an eye on him. I crossed the road and didn't bother to look back for a few minutes, assuming he had stayed on the other side, but I began to hear footsteps approaching. I glanced over my shoulder and saw that the guy was about 20 feet behind me. I had a soft drink and a glass bottle in my bag, and figuring I was overreacting, but better safe than sorry, I stuck my hand into the bag and gripped the bottle. Another 45 seconds went by, and the guy was close enough to touch me, but he slowed to my pace and said, "Hello, how are you?" I ignored him and didn't respond. I long ago gave up on pretenses of being polite if I feel uncomfortable. A stranger's feelings matter less than my feeling of safety in any given situation. But he persisted in talking to me. "Hi, are you going to work?" "No," I was being short with him. "Are you going home?" "Yes," I said coldly. "Do you live in this direction?" I just looked at him. He tried again. "Do you live off this road? Where do you live? Do you live close by?" I didn't respond and slowed my pace, letting him walk on. I was still gripping the glass bottle, ready to hit him with it should he try anything. He tried to slow down so I would catch up with him, but I slowed down so much that I was barely walking. He was maybe 300 feet away at this point, and simply stopped and turned around, watching me and waiting for me to catch up with him. I reached into my pocket with my free hand and tried my phone. Of course, my phone was dead. I figured it would last the walk home, but the dodgy battery had other ideas. Surprisingly though, I wasn't afraid. He had started walking again, but still quite slowly. He looked over his shoulder again after another minute, and I seized the opportunity. There was a path to a block of flats that was obscured by tall hedges, so I leapt behind them. I waited for nearly 10 minutes, never letting go of that bottle the whole time. I peeked around the hedges to make sure he was there, as I also peeked behind bins and bus stops to make sure he wasn't hiding in wait. But as far as I could tell, I had lost him. Maybe he didn't mean anything by this, but if you suspect a woman is afraid of you and she is walking alone at night, don't speak to her. It will not help. Especially don't ask her where she lives repeatedly. I was not drunk. I did not appear to be drunk, or need any help. I was just walking home as I ordinarily would. I am, however, inclined to believe he had bad intentions. I would rather be too cautious than not.